Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Science of Superpowers. So excited to be here with you today. I'm Tonya Recla, and I have with me Chris Hadnagy. Do you want to say hello, Chris?
Hey, everybody. Nice to be here. Thank you, Tonya, for having me on.
Oh, you're so welcome. So welcome. Chris is the author of many things, but really kind of the voice behind human hacking and in the social engineer space. And his most recent book, which we're going to be talking about today, is Human Hacking: Win Friends, Influence People, and Leave Them Better Off for Having Met You. Right? That sounds good. Like that. What better life can we live than to think that people feel touched and lit up and enlivened, inspired even by an interaction with us, right? And nothing, there's no greater compliment, at
Mm.
least in my book, than that. And so I'm really excited about that, particularly given your history and sort of
Mm.
where you come at that conversation, which we'll dive into as well. But before we get into the real juicy stuff there, we're going to start off with, what are your superpowers and how are you using them for good?
Well, I would say understanding how humans make decisions and using that knowledge and bettering communications. So that way we can enhance our ability to have conversation with each other and understand what we're truly trying to say instead of the miscommunications that we so often see in the world.
Oh, brilliant. And I think we saw that a lot, especially in this post-pandemic world.
Yeah.
What happened when we couldn't be together physically, when we got a little bit afraid of what the future was going to hold for us, that's when we see all of those programs come to the surface, the things, the barriers of communication, if you will, that really get in the way of us truly connecting with each
Mhm.
other. And that's what we're talking about today, is we talk about energetics and human hacking. So you hear us talk all the time about energetic communication, energetic sensitization, these superpowers that we have. Dare I say, the one
Mm.
superpower we all have, which is the management of our energetic system, because we live in a responsive universe. It responds to us. So how we project energetically dictates the type of reality that we live in. And another thing that we discovered from the pandemic is that we don't share realities, right? We're all kind of living in our own little worlds. But what we do share is spaces, right? Whether that be virtual spaces, whether it be physical spaces. And when we come together, we can choose to use that for good, right? Or for evil. And so let's talk a little bit about how you came to the conversation of social engineering, and looking at it from the security lens, because you have a fabulous,
Mm.
fabulous organization, Innocent Lives Foundation, that serves children and youth in this virtual space that is quite the playground for some of these social engineering techniques. And we studied it in the counter intel side of things, how you get people to do things that
Mm.
they don't really want to do or they don't think they want to do. But we've seen all of the terrible ways that those techniques have been utilized. So, share with our audience a little bit about how you came to this conversation. That's really kind of a dividing conversation, if you will, right? People feel pretty strongly about these techniques and
Mm.
stuff that we teach. How did you come into this space?
Yeah, I wish I had a really cool origin story, like like Steve Jobs or something. But my life was a series of really happy mistakes. So I was an exploit writer and a pen tester, which basically we got paid to break into networks and test people's security. And I really stunk at it. I wasn't good. I wasn't bad at coding, but I really loved the work and I loved the job. And what I found, I was good at people. I was good at talking to people. So we'd get a job. I would say, "Hey, can I email a person and just ask for their password? Like, make believe I'm the IT department." And this is before we knew that phishing was a huge thing. We're going back like 18 years, right? And boss would say, "Yeah, sure, try, see if it works." And I'd make a phone call or send a thing and it would work. And I'd get someone's password and then we'd be in. And everyone was like, "Whoa, how did you do that?" I'm like, "I don't know. I just asked." And that bothered me that I didn't know. So I started reading all these books you could see behind me on psychology, on persuasion, influence, nonverbal communication, how our brains work, body language, everything that I can possibly read. And every time I read something, I would document in the columns, and then I would go and try that technique again, but with like take Robert Cialdini's book on influence, and I would try a principle of authority, and I'd go, "Ooh, that worked, and now I know why." And now I can build education for that person on how to not be susceptible to it. And that took about 10 months of my life to build a framework that I was just going to be for me. I didn't think it was going to be anything. I just built the framework so I knew how what I was doing worked. And the guys working would say, we should put this online. This is really good stuff. So I bought a domain, social-engineer.org, and I put the framework online. And like 2 or 3 months later, the world's most famous social engineer, Kevin Mitnick, his publisher, he was in prison. He did some bad things, but he reformed, and really, really good guy. Sadly, he passed away recently. But his publisher called me and said, we want you to write a book. And I went, no, I'm not an author. I'm just a hacker. Like, I don't want to write a book. And she's like, no, really, you got to write this book on this framework you put out. Like, no one's ever done this. So a little convincing, I wrote my first book. And that was in 2009. And it came out at the beginning of 2010. And when that book came out, I was getting an unimaginable amount of calls from companies saying, no one has ever talked about this. No one is outside of military spaces. No one's ever even tried to understand this. Come consult with us. And I got a lot of job offers, and I didn't want to go work for someone else. So I ended up starting this company in consulting, and then went on to write 4 more books after that. But, jumping ahead, at one point in my career, during one of these tests, I had a chance to find a person who was hurting kids. He was molesting children, and he was trading recordings of what he was doing to kids on the dark web. And it was my first time. Like, I always thought this was a problem in foreign countries, not here in America, right? And here we are, and it was, smack dab in the middle of my work. And I'm like, this can't be happening. And we worked with the law enforcement agencies, and we got him arrested. And he'll be in prison for 150 years. And it was a moment in my life where I said, I didn't know that my skill set can do something good. I just thought I was making people more secure, which isn't a bad thing, but I just thought I was a hacker, right? I didn't know at that moment that I can actually save a life. And it was this really pivotal, moment in my path, in my life path, where I went, I have to do this again. I can't walk away from that. And I started telling this story when I was teaching classes, and a young man came up to me and said, I volunteer for an organization where we hunt child traffickers. Do you want to work with us? I said, yes, 100%. So I volunteered with them for a year, and they started going a different path, and it wasn't a bad path, but that passion to save kids was still something that was really deep in me. So I started the Innocent Lives Foundation 6 years ago, a little over 6 years ago. And the whole mission was to find people that have a skill set like me, that can do things on the internet, that can understand communication, and find people who are hurting kids and then turn them over to law enforcement. So we're not a vigilante group. We're not those guys who you see on Facebook, like go to McDonald's and try to embarrass someone who was talking to a 13-year-old girl. 86% of those cases get kicked out of court. So when I saw that, I said, I don't want to be that guy. I want to be a person who literally does stop bad people and help kids have a better life. And so we do it all above board, fully legal. We work very closely with law enforcement agencies around the globe. And I'm happy to say, as of just a couple of weeks ago, we've handed in our 500th case to law enforcement to help. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but that's kind of my journey. And then if I take that one step forward, my latest book came as a culmination of all of those things I said, where I said, wow, all these skills I have, you can use this in everyday life to just be a better human, to learn how to talk to another person, your kids, your spouse, your employees. And it was like a moment in my life, because I trained MI5, MI6, SOCOM, U.S. military, corporations around the globe. And I started to get these answers back of my classes, people saying, you saved my marriage. And I'm like, whoa, I taught you a security class. I didn't do any marriage counseling. And they're like, no, that thing you taught me about communication profiling, I used it on my wife, and I figured out why we're arguing and fighting, and now we fixed. And I'm like, what? Then I had some parents reach out and said, wow, we used your book to learn how to communicate with our nonverbal autistic kids. And I'm like, what? Like, that wasn't the purpose. And it was really emotional for me, because I didn't plan on doing any of that. That's why I said I wish I had this origin story where I was a genius and this is what I was going to do. But my work ended up being really important for people. And then so this book had to happen and had to come out and be that thing that can help people learn how to use these skills and not be a bad person, not be somebody that uses them to hurt other people, but to enhance your life and the life of those around you.
Chris, I think it's a fabulous origin story, and one of the best, because it evolved, right? It evolved it grew you as it was growing itself. It was this real synchronicity of the vocation, right? Where our deep yearnings and the world's deep hunger connect, right? Where we need to understand what's happening in these exchanges. We saw that during the pandemic. It was so easy for us to divide, particularly in these virtual spaces, because we don't understand the
Hmm.
energetics. I remember being a counter intel agent, and for whatever reason, I've always been very sensitive to intuition and the exchanges that are happening well beneath the surface, which I contend most people that crack these codes are extremely sensitive to these things that are happening under the surfaces, and it's our life's work to kind of describe them and bring them up above the surface for those who aren't as sensitized to it, to be able to start utilizing the tools so they become sensitive, right? Some of us come up from the bottom and some of us come from the
Yeah.
top and go down. But it's almost impossible to explain using the words and the vernaculars and the silos and the stuff that currently exist above the surface. um, when we're talking about levels deep of us, of our subconscious, of our energetics, of the programs that run us, right, and things that happen for most people invisibly, but for those of us with eyes to see, like, we see it so clearly and we can incorporate it. And it's kind of like where the whole NLP stuff got started, was they were wanting to understand how very successful, happy psychologists were able to kind of
Hmm.
make this work, right? How they were having success with their clients, and they were doing it intuitively. But over time, you can start to see, like, what are the patterns, and that's what you were able to do. You were able to harness those mechanisms, probably because of an innate sensitivity that you possess, and then do it enough times using science, right? I
Hmm.
loved how you talked about the changing of the subtitle from the art,
Yeah.
of social, of human hacking, to the science of human hacking, right? We
Yeah.
we danced around that space too with the science of superpowers. It is a science when you can do it over and over and over again and produce the same result. And that's what, similar to my journey, I was looking for the thing that worked 100% of the
Mhm.
time. And even when we had the corporate counter intel firm, it wasn't enough that we could do something and it worked one time to catch bad guys doing fraud and whatnot. Like, we had to have a methodology that worked every single time. And so
Mhm.
I understand that hunger, that desire to want to be able to explain it in a way that people couldn't debunk, right? Not from an ego standpoint, but it's just not helpful. Like,
Yeah.
it's just not a helpful methodology if it's not effective over and over and over again. And for you to have cracked this code, be able to break it down into terms that people can understand and then study and utilize, is incredibly powerful. And I think it speaks to how we're evolving as a humanity. And it really is kind of the holy grail to be able to take these unseen things, these intuitive things, and bring them to the surface and share them in a way that makes sense. And so kudos to you for that. My
Thank you.
applause to you for that, because I can feel your passion in it, and I love how it's evolving, and it mirrors what I think we're doing as a humanity. Right? It's not enough for us anymore to be able to divide and conquer, or to, might is right. Like, we want to understand the more subtleties that exist between us, because there's a richness in that exchange, right? To be able to have somebody feel like their life was somehow improved by
Mm.
having connected with you, that there's a subtlety in that exchange, right? It's very rarely about the things that we think, like money
Mm.
or other incentives
Yeah.
that we think. It's how does it make us feel about ourselves, about the future, about our world, and that's really at the heart of what you're talking about here. And so where do you go from here, Chris, with this stuff? That, I mean, you've touched into so many different spaces, and now you're touching homes and lives and relationships between parents and children. Where do you go with this now?
Yeah. I just want to comment on something you said because it's really powerful. I didn't when I didn't intend for all this to happen, but I love that it happened because getting an email from someone telling me that their marriage got saved because of
Mhm.
reading a book or coming to a class, like that's more rewarding than $1 million in the bank or whatever amount of money you want to put, right? It at the end of the day, like we're all going to end up taking a dirt nap at some point, right? And I want my kids to go, wow, dad saved a lot of people, or dad helped a lot of people, not wow, dad made a ton of money, right? So that that to me is the motivator, right? And sometimes, not always, but sometimes when you do what you're passionate about and you do it well and you help others, success comes with that, and that's not always a guarantee in my opinion, but you can see that people feel that passion and they want to work with people that really understand it. Like for me, one of my analogies I love to use is when I couldn't understand why it worked, I felt like an auto mechanic that if you went and said, "Hey, I have a problem with my car," and he goes, "Yep, that's the brakes. I can hear them squeaking. Great. Can you fix it?" He goes, "Nope." Well, then you're a useless auto mechanic, right? And when I was going to people and I was doing these security assessments and they go, "Okay, but why did that work?" And I would go, "I don't know. I felt like a useless auto mechanic. Like I can't help you. All I'm doing is like basically punching you in the face and then saying, I don't know how to tell you to defend yourself. So I'm just going to keep punching you in the face."
Good luck with that.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, and it felt like a really useless part of my, of this industry. And so I think part of my mission now is I want to change that. That's why I teach at University of Arizona. It's why I do so much speaking. It's because I want to change the way that this industry approaches this, because becoming a like professional social engineer is very easy. I mean, I see people come into the industry all the time. Almost anyone that is comfortable talking to people could hack a person, but they're all at that level. I shouldn't say that. Not all. That was mean. A lot of them are at that level where they don't know why it worked. So they're good at the job, but they can't explain the mechanisms to fix it. So it's about when I was like that, it was more about my ego. It was about me. It was about me wanting to feel really cool hacking things. And the more I did well at it, it was like, yes, I'm awesome. But then when that first client said to me, "Okay, that's great, but what do I do? Because if you can do it, then the guy over there can do it, and that guy can do it, and I'm going to be hacked. So what do I do?" And I sat back and went, I got no clue. I don't know. And you can't put a firewall up to protect humans, right? There's no antivirus that does that. So that's when it hit me. This has to change. Like the industry has to change. We have to start understanding. And I'll bring it back to something else you said during pandemic. I mean, it's like you look at the way people communicate with each other online, and it's so hateful and it's so bitter and it's so like they say things to people that I can't imagine you would ever say to someone's face. And because that screen divide gives people empowerment to say these horrific things. And we have to realize that, I just reading something on psychology today that that old adage, "Sticks and stones break your bones, but words can never hurt me." That's not true. Words do hurt. And when people say things that are mean and terrible and bigoted or misogynistic or racist, it hurts. And it doesn't just hurt the person you said it to, it hurts all the people reading it. So learning how to take these skills outside of security and just every day, just think about, look, I don't think I'm going to change the world, but if I can change my little small circle right here where I live and my family and my friends, and then they take that and they can change their little small circle of their family and friends, and then that's like sounds like a pyramid scheme, but then maybe the world does change eventually, right? But in the best way possible. It's not
we can
just
use the pyramid scheme for good, right?
For good, right? And I think that's where I want to see it go. And of course, I don't want to stop working with ILF. For me, that mission, if you had asked me 6 years ago, where would you be? I thought it'd be 4 people in a room doing the work and then handing stuff over. I got 6 employees. I got 50 volunteers. It blows my mind to think like, here's an organization that just started from an idea. And now all of these people support it. We just had our first gala out in LA. LeVar Burton was our host. Like that blows my mind. LeVar Burton, my kids both learned how to read because of him, right? Like it's like just the things that you say that out loud. I'm like, oh no, wow, that's my life right now. It doesn't make sense. So I wish I had a better answer. I don't know what happens next. I think I am working on some AI projects, which I know is the new buzzword, but I think one of the things I'm really scared about is the bad guys are using AI in unprecedented ways, and we are not. So it's like we're taking a knife to a gunfight, and it feels like we need to start thinking about how to use AI in protection. So I'm working on some things like that, and that's hopefully another iteration of this. Like I don't know where that goes because AI scares me a little. And I don't know if you look into that much, but AI scares me a little because of how far it's advancing without regulation. But I think it's part of this matrix of how we grow and we evolve as humanity, because machines are becoming more and more integrated into our lives. And I don't see that stopping. So we have to kind of grab it, adopt it, and then hopefully let people with good morals and ethics help guide it. So it doesn't, we're not living in Skynet in a couple more years or something terribly scary like that.
Well, I do look into AI, and in fact, I take a little bit of a different approach with it because it's inevitable, right? And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
to me, all the conversations about stopping it and this, I'm like, what do we know
no,
about trying to repress the technology? Like that's never going to
yeah,
work. But what I do
never.
know, and to your point, is yes, we need to use it for protection, but more importantly, that embracing element.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do we use it for good? And the our resistance to it, the fear stories that we create about it, that's doing more damage than what any AI is going to do in the future. And if we can
Yes,
say, look, this is an inevitability, and I've been saying for a lot of years, like we need to bring the consciousness space and the tech space together.
I
Probably
love
a
that.
decade ago, I said the only companies that will survive moving forward are those that can stay up with technology and consciousness. Because we otherwise we're creating two separate realities, two
Mhm.
whole different societies, because you've got folks in the consciousness space that just opt out, completely opt out. Like I don't touch social media for the most part because of the influence within it.
Hmm.
I'm almost
You're a
completely
smart woman.
unmarketable to,
You're,
right? Like
you're
I don't allow my energetic system to be
hmm
influenced by very much. And if I do, it's through my choice. And I'm consciously aware of it. But to get to that point, you have to understand your energetic system. You have to understand how
hmm
you're influenced. You have to understand how it feels when you start to get influenced, because otherwise it's too late. The second a program kicks in, you're ensnared. And that's how these folks have been successful. What did it for me was I was teaching, at the counter intel course, and they asked me to teach things like lie detection and NLP, and I refused. I said, first of all, it's not a science. Not None of
hmm
these are sciences because people have beaten them.
Yeah.
Polygraph, people, the worst spies in
Right.
history have beaten the polygraph.
Yeah.
So we don't know yet what's really going on under the surface. That means we need to keep digging. We shouldn't be teaching things that we don't really understand. And a very select few people can utilize these tools in ways that actually work. However, what will beat every single tradecraft rule every single time are human energetics. Every time. If you understand your energetic system and you know how to program yourself, and you've dug up all your subconscious programs and you've readapted them to who you know yourself to be, and you understand your own resonance, you're completely
Mm.
untouchable when it comes to 99.999% of these techniques, because you can feel them coming a mile away. The more expansive you get, the farther out you can see them coming. And they're so obvious once you start down that trajectory, that
Yeah.
sensitization. We've talked to thousands of people who've had some element of an awakening journey
Hmm.
into some awareness of who they are beyond themselves. And the one factor that every single one of those experiences shared was it set them on a trajectory of increased energetic sensitization.
Hmm.
That's it. That's the only thing all of them shared, because we did it across culture, across genres, across
That's
silos.
interesting, actually.
And you cannot catalyze an awakening experience for somebody, sort of like your story, like
Yeah.
it unfolds, right? It happens very uniquely within each individual's
Yeah.
reality. However, you can simulate energetic sensitization and start people on a trajectory of fortifying themselves energetically to where they're not susceptible to most of these techniques.
Yeah.
I believe that that's where we're going. And when it comes to the AI conversation, like we forget that we are creators. AI is responding to us every time. And if it does something that we don't like, it's because we're allowing it to do something we
hmm
don't like.
Yeah.
The key is that what aspect of us is allowing that to happen. And most of the time that's in what we would consider the subconscious, which for a long time we tell people that they can't really access, but it's just not true. It's just a layer of ourselves that most of us aren't sensitized to. But that's an easy solution. We know how to fix that, but it changes how we look at it, right? I think the conversations and the debate about AI are important, not because we stand a chance of stopping it from happening, but because those conversations are allowing us to start playing with frameworks that say, hey, we should start thinking generations out. What are the
hmm
implications of this? And for some of our short-sighted, Americanized kind of philosophical viewpoints, we don't often think about much beyond what happens in the immediate moment. Those AI conversations are forcing us to start saying, wait, but what are the implications of this? And I think those conversations are very valuable. we're never going to stop AI. How do we want to use it? Right. And if we're smart, the
Yeah.
conscious folks
Oh,
and the tech folks will get together and we'll be able to create solutions that pretty much disable the silly machinations that are happening by predators using these things. And I call them silly not because they're not hurtful and not doing damage, but silly because we have to start
mm,
reframing our fear around them. Right? If we're afraid of it,
yeah.
we become kind of paralyzed by it. We can't be afraid of it. We have to come up with solutions to work with it, essentially, like you're talking about. And so
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time in these spaces, um, and for me, we're off base, completely off base. The amount of money that is going to fund conversations that I think are completely worthless at this point in time, unless we start conceptualizing them from a wider perspective, it's kind of sad, actually. But I do think that they're doing something, but they're not doing what most people think they're doing. And
Yeah.
the tech side of things is literally inevitable. It's going to happen. We can't put that genie back in the bottle.
No.
And so how do we want to be with it? Right.
Mm,
And there are a lot of benefits. I had Dr. Amit Goswami on a number of times on the show, and he's out of the quantum physics realm. And he had a really good perspective too. Is like, we need AI on some level because we're evolving as a humanity. We don't want to have to deal with a lot of the kind of linear, like more minuscule type of decision making stuff that we used to have to deal with in the past. We're capable of much more, and the more we embrace and harmonize with AI, it frees us up to be a lot more creative.
mm,
It's a very different perspective, but that's how consciousness, creative intelligence folks think, right? How can
yeah.
we use this in that capacity? We're a long way from there, but if we can start bridging the gap between those two camps, I think we're going to see some very creative solutions. And so I love that you're sitting in that space, that your journey has continued to evolve you into like what's possible for humanity with them. Yes, we can take some of those tools and use them for protection, but I think ultimately, if we tackle that conversation at that bigger level, we're going to see those solutions. Those are just a
Yeah.
natural byproduct of looking out generations from now and saying, what world are we creating? And what world do we want to create for our children, for their children? You
Mm,
mentioned, your kids being able to say, dad saved lots of kids, but the bigger thing is dad knew how to connect with me.
mm,
Dad knew how
yeah.
to take a breath and take a pause and say, hey, what's going on in your world? And listened and really could feel me and made me feel heard and felt. Like, you give kids that and you're giving them the world, right? And they'll create the next generation of solutions because they know themselves to be loved,
Yeah.
right? They know themselves to be creative and validated. That's valuable in our society.
Yeah. Way more valuable than money or gifts. And
A
you can, and
hundred
that's
percent.
that's scientifically proven, right? Children that are loved and that feel loved and that know they're valued, they can be the poorest kids on earth, but they're happy,
That's right. Well,
versus
and we saw
those who have
even
everything.
even in the spy sector, like money was never the most valuable motivator ever. And then we were so off base by chasing them. And we need to follow the money, but why are people doing these things, right? What is it that they're seeking? What is that deep hunger, that deep need within us that cries out for us to kind of go against society? Like, it costs us a lot when we decide to go against the grain to kind of do these deceptive techniques. Like, what is it that would allow us to do this? My husband's kind of my hero in this place because he's on social media all the time, and people will solicit, he'll get these random emails like, hi, do you want to do this thing? And he's like, and he engages them in conversation, and he's like, is there anything else you could do with your time that would actually be beneficial for the world, right? And he got this one guy talking, he's like, well, I do like taking photographs, and he's like, what if you took photographs and sold those instead of scamming people online? Like, could you make
Wow.
money at that, right?
That's
And I'm like,
phenomenal.
dude, you're nuts, but
Yeah.
to him, it's like, we have to stop being afraid of these things and just jump right in and go, why are you doing this? Like,
Mm,
kind of with that confused dog look. And certainly in the kid space that you're in, right? It's arming our children with how to kind of have their own sensors
yeah.
energetically. And we want to be careful with claiming like everybody can do this. But those of us who can should, and should teach others who can
Yeah.
how. and stop being afraid of the things that we think are going to take over the world, and instead go, wait, if we allow that to happen, that's on us. Like,
Yeah.
aren't we the world? And so clearly that's one of my soapboxes, as you just got to witness. But I really appreciate knowing that there are folks in the security and protection spaces still, because I opted out, who are willing to bring this part of the conversation forward. Because you mentioned the folks who are effective without knowing why, but they're only effective till they aren't.
Yeah.
And
And
they can't beat those who are energetically solid. And it's
yeah.
like, and now they're just like, oops, well, there's one. And it's in your situation, talking about kids, one is too many.
And sadly, we I think you probably seen this to your career too. A lot of people, they can rise to fame and success without the knowledge of how things are supposed to operate, and you can't really you can't stop that, because stopping that means you got to kind of be mean to other people, or you got to discredit them, and that's not my style, right? So you kind of just try to be your best and show people that, look, I can do this work, but I can also tell you why it works. And then you hope that the people who really value, because there's a lot of people who just want a checkbox right into the security world. I just got to do this because the bank says I got to do it. And then there's people who really care about being secure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the same when it comes to families, right? There's people who really care about their kids, grandkids, the people that are under them, and they want to make sure they're safe. So they take the time to learn, because that's the hardest part, I think, is if parents don't know what kind of attacks are happening, how can they possibly have communication with their kids about it? Right. So parents don't know that kids are being exploited every day on gaming sites and on chat programs and things like that. They don't understand the level that this is happening. So how can they help their kid if they
Mm-hmm.
are then proposed, or something happens to them that they didn't mean to happen? They hand a photo over that is a little risque, or totally, pornographic to some extent. And now the kid's embarrassed. They don't know who to go to. Those conversations have to happen way before that occurs.
That's right.
Right. So these skills are so important for parents and caregivers, because they have to learn, like, I could only imagine if that was my daughter, you would have a lot of emotions. Some of them might be anger or sad or disgust, but those are not the things you need to express when she comes to you and tells you that a situation just occurred. So it's understanding, like you said, yourself, your energy within yourself, and then being able to channel that and control that at certain points, so the conversation can be effective and can actually accomplish what it needs to accomplish at that moment.
That's what I love your newest book, is that you're not, I predict, like, or I contend that we cannot possibly teach enough tactics
Mm.
to arm our kids with all of the different ways that people might come at them. But by having communication, by having
Yeah.
open dialogue, by them knowing they are loved and heard, by them being able to get that fulfillment from us first and foremost, to
Yeah.
be able to feel whole unto themselves, that is a surefire way to create a platform where, one, if it even comes close to them, they'll start to go, hey, this weird, because it feels weird in their system. They
Yeah.
know, they feel it first, way before they're consciously aware of it. And if you and your children have such an amazing relationship where they go, hey, this kind of feels weird, and they can come to you and say, hey, this is what's going on. And you can say, okay, how do you handle this? I remember our daughter and her cousins were out at a park one day. We were out in California, and these adult males decided to invite them over for beer. I think they were 9, 10, and 11, like
Whoa.
ridiculously young ages, right? And so our daughter comes home, they come right home, and they're telling me this. And I said, did you feel afraid? And she said, no, I didn't feel afraid, but it was weird, right? There was this weird thing. We knew who the gentlemen were. We knew who they were. We knew where they lived and everything else. And they had kind of a history with this. And so, but at the same time, there was the initial reaction would have been, oh my gosh, you can't go to the park, you can't do this. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, you didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
You didn't do anything wrong. You have every right to be able to go to the park. It's right. It's a little neighborhood park, right? And it was, and I watched my daughter kind of deal with this, because she was pretty world savvy at this point, and be able to say, like, this isn't fair. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
just not fair for this to be going on. And so I said, how do you want to handle this situation? What feels good to you, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so we had this whole game plan strategy thing, right? She had her phone, she had her this, and it was like, okay, what's really going on here, right? Is this something to be afraid of? Or is this something to be able to turn around and go, yeah, no, this isn't going to happen here. And so they were squirrely, right? These gentlemen, and long story short, we eventually got them, right? But it was so powerful to watch these young women be able to say, like, no, just no, this isn't okay. You don't get
Hmm.
to we just want to play at the park, right?
Yeah.
And to invoke that feeling in them, not this like vigilante, like you need to take them on, but knowing they had us standing there with them, that they
Yeah.
were empowered in the situation. I'm like, this isn't something to be afraid. This is pathetic, and here's how we're going to handle this, right?
Hmm.
And certainly we kind of, had all of our backup strategies. We've had code
Yeah.
red strategies with our
Right.
daughter since she was 2, and so it was a unique situation, and I don't advise it for everybody, but it was an opportunity to repaint that picture, to say nobody gets to make you feel like a victim,
Yeah.
nobody, right? And in this situation, then they had to deal with mom and dad later, and eventually the police and everything else, but it was a beautiful opportunity to walk them through this and say,
Hmm.
this isn't going to stop here. And I'm not always going to be a
Right.
bike ride away. What options do you have available? There's 3 of you, right? What options do you have available? Like, what is the threat, and how do we really look at this from a rational perspective, rather than continue
Yeah.
to make the statement that you have no power in this moment, but because you do, and you've got the law on your side, and you've got all these other components. And it was just a beautiful, and all 3 girls afterwards, we were deconstructing. They're like, oh my gosh, it was so amazing, and then they did this, and we were like, no, and just no, right? And
Yeah.
and that's sort of the philosophy, I think, that we can start to imbue everybody with, because it is terrifying when you don't understand it, and you're educating in a way that's so incredibly important and empowering. I, for one, feel better knowing that you're in the
Thank you.
conversation, and that you're going to continue to
Thank you.
follow your path. What can we do? What can we do to best support your efforts, particularly with the foundation? Certainly, we can share your book and we can talk about that. But as individuals who are like, yes, and impassioned by what you're talking about, what can we do?
Well, there's a few things. That's a nice question. Thank you for asking that. So first, I think educating yourself, right? And you can do that on our site. We have a lot of information on innocentlivesfoundation.org for parents and caregivers for kids about how to have these difficult conversations about things that are uncomfortable. Talking to your kids about sexual exploitation or about molestation is hard. It's not, and age appropriate, of course, but it's difficult no matter what age they are. Those conversations can be awkward. What if you send a picture? What if you take a picture you shouldn't have taken? Like, let's talk about that. Those things can be really difficult. So we have a lot of information for parents there. So the first is educating yourself and your kids. But second, we're talking about us, spreading the word. We've had so many parents come to us, ask for help because their kids were exploited. Police were not helpful because and I don't mean this as any discredit to the police, but a lot of times local small town police departments don't have the training. So they do things that are terrible. Like they go and interview the kid and they were like, well, why were you so dumb to send a nude? And it's like
Mm,
just such victim blaming. And the kid just shuts down. And now they don't want to talk. They don't want to do it. So then the cops go away, right? And the parents are frustrated and lost. So they come to us and we talk to them differently and we communicate with the parents and then we help them and then we find the bad guy and then we turn them in. um, Parents, so they can come to the site, they can volunteer, they can donate. We're a nonprofit. All of these things can be helpful to keep our mission going. But I think for me, the biggest thing is just communicate with your kids, right? I mean, it's don't think teachers are going to do it, guidance counselors, other people. It's our job. It is our job. Your story reminded me of something that happened with my daughter. She's 19 now, but a couple of years ago, she was working at a shaving shop, oddly enough. And she came home one day and she's really upset. And she's telling me this story about a young man that works in the store who's being harassed by a female employee. And she's saying things to him that are inappropriate. And when he doesn't reply the way she wants, she even hit him a few times with like an umbrella. And
wow.
and my daughter Maya, she said, I feel like somebody should do something. And I'm like, well, what do you want to do? And she goes, well, I talked to him and he didn't want to report it because he feels like that will make him look weak. And
Hmm.
I said, okay, well, how do you feel about that? And she said, if the roles were reversed, if she was hitting him, I wouldn't even think about reporting it. I would just go right to the boss. And I'm like,
Sure.
okay, so what do you want to do? And she goes, I want to report it. I go, then you should. And she did. And he was a little embarrassed, but he thanked her afterward. And he said, "You saved me from an abusive situation." And she got fired. Not my daughter, the woman who was abusing. And she came home and just felt so empowered, like just so empowered. Like, I did the right thing. And I'm like, you did do the right thing, but it was her choice to do the right thing. And when we talk to our kids, the way like you talk to your daughter about that situation, and we ask them, what do you want out of this? And how do you feel about this? They get to process all of that, and they get to process how they want to move forward through life. Now my daughter has that experience for the rest of her life. So I have no doubt if she is in another work situation where she sees someone being abused, I know exactly how she's going to handle it. I know she's going to stand up for what's right and just, and she's not going to let somebody be hurt by the wayside, because I know how she'll think about it and how she'll handle it. And that, geez, as a parent, right? Can you feel any better in your life? Like that is, whew, like I'm done.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, that's right. We win. Good job. Check.
That's it. Check. Done. I feel like a good dad right now, so that it's and that, no, that's not about the stuff ILF does, but it's still the same point, is that when you have these conversations with your kids before a situation occurs, they're going to feel comfortable coming in and saying, and that's what happened. She came home from work and she's like, "I need to talk to you about something." And that to me was the win right there, is that she felt comfortable enough to come home and ask for advice and to want to talk about it because she was distraught. And if you feel like your kids aren't that way, like they're not going to want to talk to you, and I'm not saying my daughter tells me everything. I mean, she's still a normal teenager, right? But I know that if it's serious, she's going to come to me. I know that if she wants help, she's going to come to me. And if you can't say that about your kids, then it's your job to fix it, right? Your job to figure out, how do I communicate? And don't think the kids, well, they roll their eyes or they don't say, yeah, that's right. That every kid does that. I have a great relationship with my daughter and my son, but they both do that, right? So it's not.
They still roll their eyes.
They still roll their eyes. But I know that when it gets serious, either one of them would call me for help. And if so, you got to get to that point, and it's our job to do it, not their job. And that might take a lot of work if they're older and you haven't done it before. Of course, the best time to start is when they're young. Teaching them these skills and empowering them with these skills. I remember when my daughter was little, I come from a big Italian American family, and, kids, like, you always had to come out and hug whoever was there. And my daughter, reading about nonverbals and everything, sometimes she would show some fear of people, and people were like, well, she should come out and be friendly. And it's like, well, if she's uncomfortable, she's uncomfortable. And there was a reason for her discomfort, and I don't know what it is. And if I force her out of her discomfort zone, then what am I teaching her for the future? That anytime this guy makes you uncomfortable, it doesn't matter how you feel, just go give him a hug. So I said, no, we will not be those kind of parents. She's allowed to be uncomfortable. She's not allowed to be rude, but she's allowed to be uncomfortable. So we always empowered her with that if you do not feel comfortable in a situation, there is no action you have to take. You still got to be polite. You got to be nice. You got to be human. You got to make people feel better, but you do not have to be in any situation that makes you feel uncomfortable. Now at 19, I see how she handles that, and I'm very proud of that. I look back at those lessons when she was 2, 3, 4, and I'm like, thank God we did that. Because young women today are often told your feelings are invalid, like you're just being silly or whatever, it's your time of the month, or we're stupid, things like that, and they're told to ignore their actual internal radar that says this guy is dangerous, and then they're in a situation that ruins their life for a long period of time. So empower your kids to understand we are built with this amazing system that tells us when danger is near, and we have it. And when we're non-communicative little toddlers, that's what we're doing the whole time, looking at our parents for, is it good, is it bad, is it safe, is it not? And then we start to communicate with words, and sadly sometimes parents, we do the wrong thing by saying, no, that's fine, don't worry about it, or we teach them not to understand that internal radar is something that is a gift, and that we should be using it our whole life, that intuition, that nonverbal sense that we have. So I just, just saying to parents, like, really embrace that and help your kids to learn to embrace that too.
Oh, Chris, that's a perfect note to end on. That's like, amen. Drop the mic. Like, I think that fabulous, folks. There's lots of resources at innocentlivesfoundation.org. Make sure you check out Chris's new book, Human Hacking: Win Friends, Influence People, and Leave Them Better Off for Having Met You. And that includes your children, right?
Yes.
That includes your
First
children.
off, includes your children.
That's right. And if you want some training in that energetic sensitization, go to superpowerexperts.com and go to the courses tab and look for those CIFA core classes. You will appreciate having that wisdom, having that knowledge. It's going to make it easier to have these conversations. And these lessons aren't just for your kids. Most of us, our kids, our little inner children never got trained in this stuff. And it's doing damage to adults as well. The same techniques are working on us too. Use these techniques, use the sensitization tools so that you're not susceptible to that kind of influence. Modeling is the best thing you can do for your children. Chris, I can't thank you enough, both for coming on and sharing your wisdom, but mostly for being in the trenches, for being in the conversation, for following your own guidance, for allowing the universal field to move you into your placement and access so that you can be a voice in these bigger dialogues in all of the ways that you've been. We encourage you, know that you've got fans over here at the Superpower Network, and we welcome you back on the show anytime you want to share what you're up to. I can't thank you enough for that.
Thank you. This was a great time and a wonderful conversation.
Oh, I'm so glad that you feel that way. And folks, to you out there, we thank you for listening. We know that your support has helped make us who we are today. And we can't thank you enough for that. Until next time, remember who you are. We love you, love each other. Goodbye for now.